Good morning and welcome to Sharing the Mic Wednesday here on the 9:30 call. Oh, Daniela with a coffee emoji. I haven't seen that before. Good morning, Harold. It's good to see folks. We are going to record today. Marisa has a kind of presentation to set the context, and we will record that and post it on the YouTube channel. So welcome, and it's great to see folks. Tomorrow we'll hear from Ben Mardell about he wrote a analysis of the Strong Start. So hopefully folks can join there. And last night I was able to attend the Countdown to Kindergarten event at the Boston Children's Museum. And if you've ever given up or lost hope in the world, I suggest you go to an event celebrating people going into pre-K and kindergarten. It was incredible. A lot of joy, a lot of excitement, some trepidation, a few emotional parents, but all in all, it was a beautiful night. They opened up the Children's Museum and have all kinds of activities. So it was really great to be there. So congrats to the Countdown to Kindergarten team. I'm sure they were asleep. They have more events this summer. So Marissa, I'll turn things over to you.
Thanks, Amy. All right, so I just put in the chat the link to EEC's website where they talk about the public comment period, which is what we are going to talk about hopefully on the sharing the mic call today. So, as you all know, we've kind of kept these Wednesdays sort of open agenda. We want it to be a little bit more interactive than our typical 9:30 call where it's sort of presentation and there's a few minutes for questions. So I'm going to attempt to fly through about 9 slides and then hopefully we'll have about 15 minutes for conversation at the end. That's the goal. So someone please hold me to that in the chat if I'm running over. Amy, can you turn on the share screen for a second? And Eugenia, I saw you were here too. So if I am missing anything or you want to add any context from the EC's side, feel free to jump in as well.
All right, sorry about that, Marissa. You should be able to share now.
Yes. Okay. So I wanted to just focus in a little bit on EEC's public comment period. There we go, which we are in the middle of. So I wanted to set a little bit of context, I guess, on this too, because obviously, the department is sharing this process that they're going through in a way to get feedback from you all on the operational grant, the C3 proposed formula. But I thought it'd be helpful to set a little bit of context on sort of what happened before this that got us to this point, and why is EEC, putting out a public comment period? What are some of the, parts of the policymaking process that have happened up until this point? So you can see on this slide just a little bit of the timeline. We are in the middle of the public comment period right now. There is a live virtual event September 8th from 6 to 7:30. And you're able to submit written feedback from now until mid-September, I believe it is. So what we really wanted to talk about today was sort of setting the context for this and encouraging you all to get involved and to participate in this public comment period. And we'll talk a little bit at the end about how to do that. So, wanted to start a little bit with sort of the history of all of this and why EEC is putting this out for public comment right now. So, going all the way back to 2018 for a minute here. This idea of a stable source of funding that would go to early education care providers in Massachusetts that could cover the true cost of providing high quality care and enable providers to raise educator salaries without passing those costs on to families. That's an idea that has been around for a lot of years now. And, looking back at 2018, when the Common Start Coalition really kind of came together, advocates sort of began to push for that idea of a direct-to-provider funding source that could help reform the current or the previous early education and care financing around that time. Fast forwarding a few years later, obviously we all know that the COVID pandemic began in 2020, and as a result of that, there was some federal COVID relief funds that went out to all the states across the US. And Massachusetts used those funds to create the Commonwealth Cares for Children C3 grant program. And its sort of federal allotment was $475 million. And Massachusetts took over funding for that, took over the $475 million line item, and began funding it through sort of a state funding stream in fiscal year 2023. Now, when we look forward to last year's budget cycle, so the FY25 budget, Massachusetts passed a number of significant early education and care policy reforms through the state budget in FY25. So these were, mostly in outside sections, but essentially an entire early education and care bill was sort of picked up and transplanted into the budget that year. And, we saw a lot of things included in that policy language, but there was specifically a lot of language around the operational grants. It's sort of making that program permanent and creating some additional programmatic parameters around them, which I'll go into a little bit more on the next few slides. That brings us to where we are now, which is that EEC is going to be holding a public comment period for FY26, which is the fiscal year that we are currently in, to formally establish the formula and to make a few programmatic changes that sort of bring the C3 program in line with some of those requirements from the laws that passed in FY25, or the law that passed in FY25. And I also just wanted to sort of pose this kind of idea of the future too. This is something that is, an annual process. That's how it's written into the legislative language, where the Department of Early Education and Care will review and update the operational grant formula and make other programmatic adjustments. So this isn't sort of a one and done thing where, we're gonna set the C3 formula, this over the next month, and then it's gonna stay that way forever. This is something that we hope is an ongoing process and that you all can continue to kind of weigh into the grant, what's working, and what you might hope to see changed. All right, so to zoom in really quickly on what some of that language in the FY25 budget said. So the first thing, which I think is really important, is it made C3 permanent. We spent those first few years, there was so much concern among early education and care providers around, I can't put this towards salaries. It's not an ongoing funding stream. I'm going to put it towards bonuses instead, or, worrying about your budget, your own your program's budget, and how you were, could you count on this funding stream? Was this something you should build in annually, or was this something that, was more one-time funding? This program is permanent now in Massachusetts. It has been codified into state law, and I included the language there where you can see the specific sort of budget language that was included there. Now, obviously, this is subject to appropriation, like most things in Massachusetts that are funded through state government. So, we have to continue to advocate for the funding levels that are needed, but I think that that's a really important sort of milestone in Massachusetts, that C3 is now permanent. The second thing I wanted to point out was the requirement for EEC to annually update the grant formula with a public hearing and board approval. So that's sort of the reason why EEC is conducting this process right now. So that kind of gives you a little bit of the context for why we're in the middle of this public comment period. Again, sort of shared the language there at the bottom so you can see some of the specifics there. These are two new grant requirements that were included in the legislative language. So the first one is really meant to incentivize participation in the Child Care Financial Assistance Program and increase those available options for families. So the language is written that as a condition for receiving operational grants, the department shall require early education and care providers to continue to or demonstrate a willingness to enroll children receiving child care financial assistance if a family receiving child care financial assistance chooses the provider and the provider has an available opening. And I will just say, as that specific sentence was negotiated, there was a lot of back and forth on what language should be included, what language should not be included. I think we all have a really an appreciation for the current context where many families that might be income eligible don't have access to child care financial assistance, which limits the number of families that programs are able to enroll. And at the same time, we all do have these goals of making childcare more affordable for families. So it's sort of balancing that in-between area where we want to incentivize participation in this without it being prohibitive for programs or it being something where, we're asking programs to to participate in a system where there's no additional, investment in childcare financial assistance for families. The second grant requirement ensures that, grant funds are going towards compensation, so salary and benefits. And it's written as a condition for receiving operational grants, the department shall require early education and care providers to demonstrate progress towards increasing salary, compensation, and benefits in line with the career ladder established in Section 21, and if not feasible, provide increased salaries, compensation, and benefits to the extent possible. So this is another example where I think our current state doesn't necessarily match the future state that we all hope for, the vision that we might have for early education and care. So, I know I've had many conversations with many of you on this call that, increasing early educators' salaries, providing more access to benefits, these are some goals that we have that we believe are important for the system, for early educators, for recruitment and retention, for all of it. And at the same time, we know that there's a reason why programs haven't been able to make those investments up until this point without passing those costs on to families, that there needs to be some sort of investment from the state that allows you to cover that gap between the salaries you're able to offer now and the salaries that you want to offer. And so that's sort of where the C3 grant comes in, the idea being that, as grant funds increase, that you'd be able to make those investments in your early educators moving forward. And then just to zoom in really quickly, just to give a little bit more context around that idea of a career ladder, this was some of the language that was written in about the career ladder. So specifically that the salary should be commensurate with public school teachers. So just to give you a little bit of context around sort of the level of investment that would be needed, the idea would be that these salaries would be level with educators that are working in the public school system with an equivalent education, credentials, and training required for the position. So let's talk quickly about sort of EEC. This is from the board meeting. The slide is from the EEC board meeting, but how are they approaching this public comment period? They shared that they have sort of these two goals: to maintain a commitment to predictability and minimize disruptions after two significant changes to the C3 grant in the past 2 years. And also just this acknowledgement that any change they make right now has to be cost neutral, because the C3 grant has been level funded at $475 million for the past few years, which is challenging because there has been growth in the program. So they are using this public comment period to formally establish the current formula, so not making significant changes to that formula. Also, bringing those two grant requirements into the program, so ensuring that programs are willing to accept children that are receiving childcare financial assistance and encouraging programs to meet salary benchmarks, as well as sort of the ongoing analysis of C3 data. The only other thing that I wanted to point out here is just that the language they've shared so far is that this will be an attestation of willingness to accept applications from children with CCFA, and that they're looking at sort of fund use requirements, focusing funding on workforce investments. So this is sort of the information that we have so far about this public comment period, what's going to go into it, what some potential changes will be for the grant. And I think it's also important to acknowledge that this, while it doesn't change a lot in the immediate future, it also kind of gives us all time and a process to think about what we might want to change about C3 moving forward, what other adjustments might we want to make. And there's this idea of reviewing field feedback and consideration of proposals for FY27, so next year's fiscal year. And I wanted to kind of end the conversation around that piece, that that whatever we're thinking about for this public comment period, that your feedback might not show up in the next year's changes for C3, but that there might be questions that you have around FY27, or that you might be thinking about things that might come into play in a future year. So I'm going to pause there and just see if there are any questions or comments, whether you have a question about the public comment period right now, or if you're starting to think about sort of planning for the future and doing this process again next year. So I included a couple questions here that just sort of stood out to me, but can read through those quickly as people are kind of gathering their thoughts and adding their questions to the chat. But the first one is, how will the salary benchmarks and fund use requirements eventually connect to the EEC credential that's in development? And when you think about your program, how much additional C3 funding would you need to meet those salary benchmarks? What are the salary benchmarks? I think these are all questions that we've heard kind of raised on the 9:30 call so far. And then what other formula adjustments should be considered for FY27 and beyond? What are some other things that you might want to see changed in C3? All
And
right.
so thank you, Marissa. It's great. We have 52 folks on the call. Folks for joining as you were speaking. So Marissa added in the chat first about the public comment period, so we can add that link again. And then Eugenia added that there'll be Spanish, Portuguese, Haitian Creole, Mandarin, and ASL interpretation at the hearing on September 8th.
Sounds good. So we have a RSVP link to the virtual public comment hearing here on September 8th from 6 to 7:30. The link that I put in the chat and that is also linked here goes to the our advocacy HQ toolkit page, which I've created a document that kind of summarizes all of this in one place. So it includes all of the information that EEC has shared on the proposed formula, the link to the August 2025 board meeting slides where the department goes through this public comment period and their thoughts on the C3 formula, instructions on how to submit your public comment, so where to email it, who to email it to. And then I also included a template. So if you've never done this before and you're a little nervous about that piece, just some very vague guidelines on what you might want to include in your written public comment. And Eugenia, do you want to say a quick bit just about anyone who does go to the virtual public hearing, what to kind of expect there and what that looks like?
Yeah, I love it when folks join in person because it's always nice to hear people speak in their own words. But we will start with that same presentation we used at that August board meeting. So we'll run through the slides. It will take probably around 10 to 15 minutes. And then I'll call on people so folks can raise their hand or let me know that they have a comment, and I'll just call on folks in order. Folks will have 3 minutes each to share what they'd like. And then we just go from one to the next. But it is hugely helpful, and a lot of our team, some of our board members may join to listen live as well. We'll record that session, it will get posted on our YouTube page. And we'll post it with all of the interpretation we have. So in English, Spanish, Portuguese, Haitian Creole, Mandarin, and then with ASL, so that folks can watch it back if they missed it too. And it will be part of the formal public comment period, just like if you submitted in writing.
Amazing. So just to wrap it up, Strategy is planning to submit public comment. If you all have thoughts and you want to send them our way, we'd be happy to incorporate that into our talking points as well. But just really hope that this encouraged you all to get involved in the process. This is, again, hopefully the first of many of these experiences where, you all get to weigh in on some of the changes that are happening at EEC. But this is a really important part of the process and a great opportunity to talk about C3.
Thanks so much, Marissa. And thank you, Neri, for your recording skills so that we have the presentation part of this. And we will, I'm sure, at the next sharing the mic, we can maybe double back so folks have a chance. We'll post this on the email for next week because we know this is a transition time for many folks, ending summer, beginning September. But anything we can do to help, we are here for it. So we will see you tomorrow on the 9:30 call. Thanks so much for joining us. Thanks, Marissa.